The meeting is being live streamed. Got
Yes. Okay.
it.
Amazing. That's good news because for a moment I was thinking we might have the same problem as last week. So let me just make double sure that we are live. Yes, we are live. Amazing.
Amazing. Good.
So, hello and welcome everyone to another Facebook Live. My name is Jana Retief and I'm the Foundation Manager at the Noakes Foundation and I will be your host for today. And today we have the honor of welcoming a true expert in the field of pediatric nutrition and dietary intervention, and someone whose passion for helping families navigate the complexities of nutrition is truly inspiring. However, before I introduce her, I just want to remind everyone that tickets are now available for the Noakes Foundation's 10th anniversary. We are incredibly excited about this event. It is scheduled for the 18th of April at the Taj Hotel in Cape Town, and donation starts at 2,000 Rand per person. And you are welcome to email us at info@thenoakesfoundation.org if you would like to secure your seat. And we hope to see all of you there. So, you are also please invited to let us know where you're from, tune in and ask any questions to our guest today. And joining us today is Kath Megaw, a clinical pediatrician, pediatric dietitian, and the founder of NutriPeds. With over 24 years of experience in private practice, Kath brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table, particularly in the areas such as special needs, fussy babies, picky eaters, and epilepsy. Her journey has taken her around the globe, from studying at the prestigious Johns Hopkins Medical School in Baltimore, USA, to speaking at various baby and toddler seminars and running workshops on infant and childhood nutrition. She is also one of the Nutrition Network lecturers, and her topic of focus is epilepsy. Kath is not only dedicated to assisting her young patients with their nutritional needs, but also offering invaluable support to their parents. She has co-authored several books, including Feeding Sense and Real Food, Happy, Healthy Children, and has been actively involved in non-profit organizations aiming to bring cost-effective dietary interventions to special needs groups across Africa. Kath's commitment to her work extends to her involvement in international brands, where she advocates for improved nutrition management in various health conditions. She has also treated my own daughter before and guided us through our journey of navigating allergies. So today we're very privileged of having her here with us. So if you have any questions for her today, please just pop it in the comment section and we will get to it. So Kath, welcome. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Oh, thanks so much. It's a real privilege to be here and to be on this live podcast with you.
So I am just going to dive right in with some questions that I have for you. And the first question is, I would really like to know, can you share with me and our audience what initially drew you to specialize in pediatric nutrition and dietary intervention, particularly areas such as epilepsy management?
So when I started dietetics and I studied it, we didn't actually cover a lot of pediatrics, but the little bit we did, I was absolutely in love with and fascinated by. And then when I got the privilege of being able to do a fellowship through Johns Hopkins and actually study a pediatric dietetic speciality, I just knew then that I was in the right space. And at the same time, I needed to make some decisions when I was doing the fellowship as to what area I wanted to move into. And with Johns Hopkins being the start of the ketogenic diet, the modern ketogenic diet, I obviously got amazing exposure to it and just loved it. And I loved the science behind it. I also enjoyed just seeing such a difference, realizing that with diets, I could make such a difference in a child's life. Just was so amazing for me and continues to amaze me and continues to keep me going. And that was kind of where my love for working with patients with epilepsy started. and just working with these little ones and just seeing, you know, how devastating seizure syndromes can be, how devastating various epilepsy syndromes can be, and just being able to say, I have a solution for you. I have something that is going to give you side effects that are good and not side effects that are negative, you know. And I think that also just keeps me going because it's just so beautiful. Every time I initiate a new little one on a diet who's been struggling with endless seizures, and then you get the WhatsApps that he's had no seizures today for the first time in like months. You just like, there's nothing that can describe that feeling of just knowing what that means for that little one and their family. So yeah, that was my journey.
That's really inspirational. And last week was I think Monday was World Epilepsy Day.
Mm,
The week was also dedicated to creating awareness around epilepsy and so on. And maybe you can explain a little bit about the principles behind this dietary approach. From my understanding, the ketogenic diet was actually one of the very first treatments for
mm.
epilepsy in the 1920s.
Correct. Yeah. So I think, you know, I love the story of the diet because it's the most researched diet in the whole world. You know, there's a lot of diets, different versions of diets over the time, but the ketogenic diet is the most researched diet. It's more researched than any epileptic drug out there. So in order for an anti-epileptic drug to get registered, it needs to have X amount of studies and show X amount of results and X amount of efficacy, and obviously, you know, as little harm as possible. But for the diet, it has far exceeded any of those. It's got way more studies. It shows no like harmful effects if managed and done properly. And so it's really just amazing to see. But in actually, the first writings of the diet is 500 BC with Hippocrates, where he noticed that people who had seizures, which he obviously didn't have a name for at the time, were often ostracized from society because they just appeared to be mad. You know, it's quite scary if you'd have witnessed a seizure. And so sadly, that would be kind of the case. And in that case, they wouldn't get fed. And these people would be starving. And during this fasting stage, they would stop having seizures. And then they would kind of be integrated back into society, but then obviously get fed and they would start having seizures again. And he noted that people who had seizures, who were starved, stopped having seizures. And that's what he put down in his annuals of medicine, which are our first kind of books, because he's known as the father of medicine. And in the 1920s, John Wilder actually came across these writings. And by then, they understood a lot more about diabetes, and that during diabetes, your body can't access sugar and can't access carbohydrates. And so your body goes into this false state of fasting and then produces ketones. And he was like interested in this because it aligned with Hippocrates' observation. And he thought, well, maybe there is a way we can take his observation and actually try it out with our patients who are having seizures. Because at this point, there were no epileptic drugs available at all. So what he did is he did the first keto study where he took two groups of patients having seizures, and one group he just fasted. So like wanted to observe what Hippocrates had observed. And the second group, he took away all forms of carbs and all forms of sugar. So created more a nutritional fasting environment where the body was forced to then access fat for energy. And what was fascinating is that both groups showed a remarkable seizure improvement and decrease in their seizures. And so he was onto something, and hence the first ketogenic diet was born, of which he then did a few other studies showing a rate of efficiency of the ketogenic diet in its very infant form of about 90% seizure reduction, which is phenomenal because for an anti-epileptic drug to be registered, it only has to show 50% chance of seizure reduction. So this diet was at this point showing that high level. Sadly, or not sadly, but in reality, what happened literally within that early decade in the 1920s is, so his first study was published in 1921, and in 1922, the first anti-epileptic drug came onto the market, and the diet literally was shelved. So as I'm grateful for medication and grateful for the help it had, I think I was just saddened that it couldn't have continued the momentum alongside the medication. But I think, like human beings, if you can take a drug and it can do the same thing as changing your diet, then you'd probably want to take a drug. And subsequently, the diet was never looked at again until the 1980s. And it was in the 1980s that there was a mom with a little boy called Charlie who was having these terrible, horrific seizures. And within like his 2.5 years of life, he was wearing a little helmet, having 30 to 50 seizures some days on all the medication that was available at that time, and just no results, just bad side effects from the meds, but no results. And the mom was just like all mother bears, on a mission to go and find the solution and what is going to help. And she basically went to the library at the University of California into the medical section and started to uncover this ketogenic diet that was kind of locked away from the 1920s, and took this research to her neurologist and said, please, we have to do this, because my son is basically in the same position as those people were. Even though there's all these meds, he's not responding. So he might as well not be having meds. And the neurologist wasn't prepared to consider it. So, like all mother bears, went to the next one and knocked on the next door, and eventually emailed Johns Hopkins at Prof Freeman, who's the now modern father of the keto diet. And he said, yes, we'll do this. So they flew her child there, and then they initiated a more kind of modern version of the keto diet with the dietitian at the time, Millie. And within 3 days, this little boy was seizure free. And he has never had a seizure since, to this day, and was subsequently weaned off majority of his medication. Actually, I think all of his medication was up in those first 3 to 6 months. So that is just so beautiful. And her husband happened to be a film director in Hollywood. So they had a lot of good resource and were good friends with Meryl Streep. And they shot the movie First Do No Harm, which is all about their story and just showing what this diet can do. And they got the word out there. There was no social media in the 80s. And so the best way to go viral was to put DVDs in Sunday newspapers, and they just for free just gave everyone access to this movie. And it created an explosion of interest in this diet. And the Charlie Foundation was set up, and Jim Abrahams, his goal and his passion, and to this day, was to fund studies, because no pharmaceutical company will fund studies for a diet, because no one's going to make money out of it. There's no money at the end of it. So the diet needed to be funded, kind of self-funded, and that's what he did. And the exponential increase in studies and research articles was amazing, and which has allowed us to really understand and to get a better understanding of all the different mechanisms of how the diet works. And so I would say literally every year we are getting a better thought process and understanding of what this diet actually does in the brain. And it's also led us to understand that it has other implications in other parts of the body and for other conditions and things like that, which is obviously where the whole Tim Noakes Foundation journey and that all came about. So, but yeah, originally just focusing around the epilepsy, and it's focused initially just on pediatric epilepsy and in children that were refractory, so medication wasn't solving their problem. And it's now being accepted as one of the treatment arms for epilepsy. So the medical aids have a very hard time trying to explain why they wouldn't subsidize this diet.
Thank you so much for that. That's incredibly interesting. And just really, truly amazing the way you explain like how this was actually, like this was known, although it was not understood so many years ago already. So you
Yeah.
mentioned now, the ketogenic diet or the low carb diet, it can be applied for different, type of conditions and so on, but there's also a lot of stigma around it. And, so I'm just wondering, let's say someone comes to you and you suggest this diet, and there's, the parents might have some concerns, or, what are some of the common misconceptions or challenges that the parents face and that you need to deal with, when you suggest they try this type of diet and lifestyle?
So my first keto diet I initiated was 23 years ago in a little girl who was having terrible seizures. Very similar story to Charlie, actually. And we actually had very similar results once we initiated the diet with her. And at that point, I think the pediatrician that actually kind of called me in was very open-minded and very open to it. And so my naively thought, okay, amazing results. Surely every doctor and neurologist will just want to do this. But I think there was a lot of fear around it. Like the idea at that point, it was very much, fat was like a swear word, and carbs were seen as the only thing out there that we should be eating with a little bit of protein on the side. So I think that kind of environment made it really difficult to convince people around the diet and the healthcare professions. So it was really felt a very lonely journey, in those years, me and this ped on kind of trying to, and we against all odds, we managed to actually initiate 40 kids on the diet in the first 5 years of doing the diet. So that was like over 23 years ago. So that was amazing. And I got the privilege of attending the first like keto conference that was held. And there was like, I think about 40 of us in the room. From as an international one, there were like 40. So it was really small, really tiny. And then every 2 years we have a keto conference, and it grew and grew and grew and grew. So definitely the word is getting out there and it's becoming safer. However, sadly, there is still a lot of misconception, and I still have a lot of pediatricians, pediatric neurologists telling parents it's the last resort. We'll do all the meds first and then we'll do the diet. And that breaks my heart, because the good research has shown that the earlier you initiate the diet, the better the results are. The earlier you initiate it in the medication trials, the better the results are. So good protocol right now is that you try one medication. If that doesn't work, possibly a second, but then you need to offer the diet. And in some cases, we should offer the diet as first-line therapy. So that is based in good science, like really good research. But the fears that the parents are often told, and parents' misconceptions that they come across, parents are much more open than the medical profession a lot of the time. But often the fears or concerns that the parents might have is that because of the fat intake, that there would be, problems with cholesterol, problems with triglycerides, and then heart disease would be a high risk of that. And so those are some of the misconceptions. In the past, because until we really understood how to give the right calorie profile and the right protein profile, poor growth was a problem with kids who were put onto the diet. So even in that early days when I was doing it, kids wouldn't grow, they wouldn't reach their height potential. And so those were concerns. Nowadays, that's not a problem. We know how we need to calculate it, how we need to work it out to ensure that they do reach all their growth potential. The other concern was kidney stones. And that is still a concern, because you put in the child into an acidotic environment. So you're creating metabolic acidosis by putting them into ketosis. And so there's a risk potentially of kidney stones. But we now know also how to manage that. So we give children who are put on this diet potassium citrate, which is carefully worked out, calculated for the child. So I've never had any children with kidney stones since we've done that. I've only had one, though, in all of 23 years. And then the big one that gets told all the time, which to me is the most craziest one, is that it's totally unpalatable, it's very hard to do, and it's extremely expensive. And I kind of counteracted that by taking on, I'm privileged to be on the committee with the ILAE on the Dietary Task Force, and that's the International League Against Epilepsy. And I sit on the Dietary Task Force. And our goal is to bring this diet in the most cost-effective way to children in Africa. And we have successfully worked into a lot of countries, training dietitians there, training neurologists, training whoever we can find that is interested in doing the diet. We've initiated it in a Ugandan orphanage where we've had access to very little fancy anything, and using their local foods have been able to adapt it and change it, whether it's a mopani worm stew or whether it's whatever it is that they've got access to. We use it to initiate the diet very, very successfully. Locally as well. My first patient I actually initiated it with was a family who was in total financial ruins, and this child was successfully managed on the diet. So the feeling that you need to spend lots of money to help your child for this diet is not founded. We can do it across all boards. So I would say, to summarize my answer for you, it would be certain health risks that parents would be nervous about and healthcare practitioners, like growth, fat profile, heart disease, which we know now also has been disproven. None of my kids, even if their cholesterols go up slightly on the diet, none of them. And if you look at the stats over the years, because we've been doing this diet since the 80s, we've done a lot of retrospective studies. We've got no increased risk of heart disease, even when kids maintain and stay on this diet. And then the unpalatability, we know we can make it taste really nice. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kath. So just, beyond epilepsy management, your approach to nutritional, guidelines and counseling for children with other neurological conditions like ADHD and autism, have you worked with those type of children too? And then if yes, like, what type of diet or what type of lifestyle do you suggest?
Well, what has been fascinating is when was it, in 2000, somewhere in the 2000, I think 2005, I attended a conference in Chicago on the keto diet, and we were starting then to talk about, Gary Torbs was actually there and he did the talk. That was the first time we got someone outside of just epilepsy to come and speak to us at the conference. And so that opened our minds a lot, that we must start looking now beyond just epilepsy. And parents started saying to us, not started, but we started taking note that parents were saying, it's helping my child's seizures, but it's helping their attention, it's helping their behavior. My child with autism is starting to respond more in therapy. My child with ADHD can now come off their Ritalin or their medications. And we were like, wow, there's something more here. And so since then, a lot of studies have gone into looking at quality of life beyond just seizure control. And we be able to extrapolate it into using it with children with ADHD and children with autism, etc., which has allowed us to create a toolbox of diets. So we've got various versions of the ketogenic diet. We've got the classical version, which is the one we've kind of introduced right at the beginning from the 1920s onwards. In the 1980s, that's what Charlie would have been put on. And we still use it today. We use it mostly with infants. So because it's extremely high fat, the protein and the carbs are quite low, just enough protein for growing and literally no carbs. So no fruits, no vegetables literally or anything. So it's quite intense, but it's for obviously a period of time, and then we change them down and we change ratios. And then we've got our modified diet, we've got our MCT version, we've got our low carb version, so it allows a bit more carb freedom, and that's the one And that's why I mentioned in it that we take into the ADHD community and into the autism community. If the child with autism also has epilepsy, so the two do go hand in hand, then obviously we will modify it based on that. So it's lovely when I sit with the patient, whether it's a child with epilepsy seizures, whether it's a child with ADHD, whether it's a child with autism, or a child with a combination of those things, I can look at this toolbox and I can say, okay, for this child, this family, what will work? So that for neurological even children who struggle with anxiety, children who struggle with depression, we had a lovely, I was in San Diego at the conference last year, and there was a lovely talk. Actually, we spent a whole day looking at a type of mood disorders and that sort of thing, and the use of the diet in that. And so we have seen such amazing application for it, to the point where I actually advocate eating a low carb, healthy diet for majority of children, actually, because I really believe that it can help on so many levels, because kids are on so much medications these days, from anti-anxieties, antidepressive, and as young as like 7 and 8. And I really think we've got to look beyond that and into how do we get our kids just eating healthier. And definitely, we just have got this idea that children must have sugars and must have carbs in abundance, and if they don't, they're not going to be healthy children, as opposed to saying, how can we feed their brains? What is good for their brains? And then it's always at the, exclusion of good, healthy fats. And I think therein lies a lot of our concerns, is that we're not giving those healthy fats. And if you look at the research now going into the diet and the direction it's going into, and the papers coming out, is just focusing a lot on what are these fats doing in the brain? What are these ketones doing in the brain? What are the different types of fats doing? And not all fats are created equal. And that's what I often have to train my parents. It's not like just go and eat every single fat that you can find out there and that's what you should be eating, but it's what types of fats are you eating and how are those going to be assisting and things like that. So I think it's really just got such a beautiful application into, and often one of the resistance I often get with children who are on the spectrum is that they are very picky eaters, they're very sensory eaters. So people will say there's no way you can change their diet. But what's fascinating is that when you start to make little changes and you start to remove the very refined starches and sugars, because those are the foods that they will kind of food jag on and will be eaten. So a mom with a child with autism who has sensory processing disorder, that child will be living on white, starchy, high carb foods. And so those are the foods. So mom will go, well, I can't do it because that's all he will eat. But then when I start to remove those foods, and you obviously need to do it with assistance, because you obviously can't have the child starving themselves, because they will tend to do that. They can be quite, sensory stubborn. Not stubborn and they want to be difficult, but just because of their sensory system. But when you start to do that, they actually change their taste and they start to get a different taste and their behavior improves. And therefore, because their behavior improves, their choices change. And it's just like a beautiful kind of domino effect that starts to happen. And it's very, very encouraging to see that. So that's a long way to answer your question, but it really is just exciting when you see these children with these conditions that they've needed to go on medication for, and you start seeing diet making such a difference.
I mean, you spoke a little bit like processed food, sugar, refined carbs, and so on, but I am always curious, like, what's your thoughts on food colorants? And I ask this because, there's, I feel like there's two, poles. And the one is saying like, food colorants are also causing a lot of behavioral problems to children, whereas others say, no, it doesn't. And I mean, everywhere, especially when it comes to kids' products and the food and the things that people most often buy for their children, and cool drinks and sodas. Like, there's so many colorants in there. And what's your thoughts on that?
So I'm so glad you asked me that question. So I think, there's a lot of good research that is coming out at the moment on around the gut microbiome. So, and understanding what's going on in our guts. And it's sad that it's taken us so long. I mean, in the 1600s, Antony van Leeuwenstein, he actually mentioned our gut microbiome, and no one took him seriously, and no one thought it was anything to look at. And now we are saying maybe therein lies one of our keys because of our gut-brain connection. And what we do know with colorants and artificial flavorants and preservatives and all those things, they have a direct impact in our gut, in our kids' gut microbiome, and changing the environments around there, which then will impact behavior and things like that. So it's 100% makes total sense, even if you just look at that model, how it can have an impact. And then on the other side, where the Feingold diets and all of that, where he did studies and noticed there was a change in behavior with colorants and flavorants and preservatives and those E numbers. And he noticed that was a different mechanism that he was looking at. So there now we've got two mechanisms that are showing us that those type of things and chemicals can have a direct impact on our child's behavior and their quality of life and their energy levels and things like that. And one of the reasons actually, so we look at ketones and we say, okay, ketones can actually interrupt a seizure pathway, and a ketone can lower the temperature in the brain, which prevents damage happening even during the seizure. So it's neuroprotective, which is one of the big roles of the keto diet in seizure disorders, in ADHD, in autism, is the neuroprotection. So we know ketones lower the temperature. We know ketones can interrupt seizure pathways, but we also know that ketones can actually change the gut microbiome. And so possibly it's that sort of reaction that is also creating the benefits that we are seeing beyond just seizure control. And by removing refined sugars, refined carbs, and those type of things, and your colorants and that, which tend to go out of the window on the ketogenic diet, we also then are benefiting the gut microbiome. So without a shadow of a doubt, it plays a huge role in behavior. And I think to say it doesn't, basically, I think is just naive and ignorance at the moment, because there is a lot of good research out there to show that. And so I would say it's 100% grounded in science.
Yeah, I mean, I am 100% convinced that the moment my eldest daughter gets anything with a type of color and into her body, I can immediately tell the difference in her behavior. Like, it's without a doubt. And then other people would tell me, no, it's just my imagination or so on. But so thank you for answering that question. I quickly want to head over to the comment section of the Facebook Live and just see here. I see a few people said hi. So Georgina saying hello. Sabrina's also checking in with us. The Nutrition Network is here. Hello, everyone. Oswald says hi. Then Simone saying good afternoon, also joining us. Then there's a comment from Ian that's just saying, wow, what wonderful work you have done. Janice is joining us all the way from Illinois in the USA. And then we have a question for you from Oswald. He's saying, on the question of processed food, are low carb or keto processed foods products a better option?
I'm so glad you asked that question. That's such, and I think is become something I have become concerned about, because obviously, if you can make a product and it's like everyone wants to buy it because it's the thing to do right now, it again can be open to abuse. So just like we have created like a whole industry of sugar and sugar products and mass producing it, the minute you start that, you're going to run the risk of preserving it, of using colorants, of using those type of things to make it more appealing. And so just because it's got a label around it of it's Banting or keto or low carb, you still need to read the labels. You still need to be a label detective. You still want to look out for those sulfites and the nitrates and those type of additives, and you want to look at all your emulsifiers, how much has been added in there. So natural is always best, whether you are doing keto, whether you are doing a modified version, whether you're doing low carb, whether you are doing a balanced, healthy kind of version of a low GI diet. You want to always go natural as much as possible, because that is going to be the best for you, your child, your gut, your body. So that's an excellent question. So I think people must remain label detectives. Don't just look at the front of a packaging and go, oh, okay, it's keto, it must be healthy, or it's this low carb, it must be healthy. Just read there what the manufacturer has put in, question it, look at the label.
Thank you for that. I want to come back. You spoke a little bit about the picky eating, and I have I have my eldest, she's quite picky. The other one, she doesn't mind, and unfortunately, she's the one with the allergies, and she's always, just wanting to try and eat everything. But can you maybe chat to us about the picky eating and the picky eating workshops that you've been doing, and how do you approach a picky eater? How can you help children to kind of expand their food choices?
So picky eating is kind of two-edged sword. So if your child is a picky eater, the chances they haven't been, especially if they're quite a severe picky eater, so in other words, they're cutting out whole food groups or things like that, and they haven't been able to get their range of nutrients over time, they become nutrient depleted. The body has a very clever way and mechanism of readjusting itself to cope with the access it has to nutrients. So in other words, if it hasn't had sufficient protein for ages, eventually demands less protein. And if it hasn't had sufficient micronutrients for ages, it starts to demand less, or sufficient calories, it starts to demand less. It's the survival mechanism. It's how you can survive in the wild for like in kind of fairly long without needing food or having access to food, because the body just goes slower. So if you get a child as a picky eater into my practice in that state, the first thing you need to do is restore the nutrition before you can start working with the eating behavior. Because a well-fed child generally desires to eat the variety of different parts of the food system that they need to eat. Whereas a child that is used to not getting enough will kind of stay in that mode. So you want to, in the easiest way, correct nutrition. And it might be through a bit of supplementation. It might be through, there are various things that you would use to try and get that in easily. So maybe a bit of micronutrient supplementation, like your vitamins and minerals, might be some protein supplementation if you need that in the beginning, if they're not eating, especially your toddlers don't like, to eat lots. Or it might be using eggs cleverly. It's a wonderful way. I'm a very big fan of eggs. And using eggs cleverly to get in good nutrition, into their diets. And then putting routines in place is really important. So, putting in a breakfast, putting in a lunch, putting in a supper in place so that they know this is my opportunity to eat. Mom knows when it's done, it's done. If they've eaten a little or a lot, it doesn't matter at that moment. They don't get anything again until their little snack. So they get little opportunities to eat throughout the day, but they don't have, so they will know. And if you watch them, they will generally eat 2 really good meals. And then you might find the others are a little bit more snacky. But we've got this mindset, you have to eat like this. So when you're in the early days of training your kids, and that you give them opportunities and you listen, watch their bodies. And most kids really struggle with eating first thing in the morning, and then they deem picky eater because they won't eat the cereal out the box, but they actually are just not ready to eat at that point. It's just that we've created a society with a lot of structures, and you probably can't get away from it. So it's not your fault, it's what is. But that's why I love it where school is proactive and they offer a morning snack at like 9 o'clock as opposed to having to wait to break at like 11 o'clock. And I say to a lot of parents, that might be the breakfast moment. That might be the first meal moment that your child is showing you they need. And let's not fight, because when food becomes a fight and a fuss, a child doesn't want to go there and they don't want to go into that moment. So never fight, never fuss. Enjoy, encourage, engage around food, but you don't want to be fussing and fighting. You want to create happy opportunities where good, healthy food is served, that they can then see, are they going to try it? Are they not? And remembering it's a journey. So they're not going to, if they're only eating one vegetable right now, or only eating one type of protein right now, they are over time going to develop a palate for eating more and more and more variety as time goes on. But for now, you want to expose them. You want to have those smells in your home. You want to have them, just seeing the food. So exposure is not that they have to have it on their plate. It might be just sitting with you and seeing it on your plate. That's good enough exposure. But if you never ever have the food in their environment, you can't expect them one day just to open their mouth to eat it. And then to recognize your child's personality, and I think the minute you have more than one child, you realize that personality makes such a difference when it comes to eating. The sensory personality, the emotional, psychological personality, the physical kind of personality all make a difference. And so you want to also respect that and understand that they will have different needs. So I think it's be gentle with them, give them exposure, have set mealtime opportunities and set non-mealtime opportunities. Because the poor picky eater is the child that gets fed the whole day because you're so desperate to always get them to eat. And their life revolves around trying to be fed, as opposed to this is now just fun time, playtime. We're not even talking about food. Okay, now we're going to go and have a food moment. Okay, now we've got a no food moment. And that also brings back that relationship, with the caregiver again. We're into a space of going, okay, this is just our time. Mom's not going to try and feed me. I get to just a safe space. We can play. Okay, now it's feeding time. Okay, but it's going to be fun because mom's going to engage with me. Dad's going to engage with me. Whoever's going to engage with me. And it's going to be a fun moment. So it's to bring that back, but to make sure that while you're doing that, while you're making those changes, you are giving nutrition in, possibly through a supplement in the beginning, because a well-fed child will look for food and they will want to eat.
That's so interesting. And to be honest, I'm so relieved you mentioned now that, sometimes kids don't eat breakfast because, I mean, myself, my husband, we as adults often, we don't eat breakfast. Often we'll only eat late in the afternoon. I sometimes do some fasting and so on, but it's different for our kids, and people always when they hear the way we eat, one of the first questions is, but how do you feed your children and what do you feed your children? And my eldest, more often than not, she just doesn't want to eat breakfast. And I, you say, I give her that opportunity. I tell her, these are the options. Do you want something? And when she doesn't eat breakfast, she comes home with an empty lunchbox, which for me, then also I control that because we try to pack a healthy low carb meal for her. But then I can clearly say, okay, she wasn't hungry. She was hungry at school. She ate it. But unfortunately, at her current school, I think it's only 10 o'clock or maybe a bit later that they can have that snack. Whereas I know some schools are more accommodating, and if the child is hungry, they can go and they can have
yeah, and
it was really
that would be ideal, but obviously schools need some structure. But that's why I think that early morning snack is quite an important one, to have that facility available for that. So I think it's just, it feels big, especially if schools are not used to it, but actually it's not really that big. And I think, again, it comes to, this different way of looking at education and different way of looking at nutrition. And I think it's, we were very much in the factory mindset, and that's how the education system came about. And I know that's not what we're talking about today, but it has implications in the way we feed and the desire and the need to give these set meals, and in the sense of timing wise. And children struggle with that, and there's these rush. And the morning is actually not the most pleasant environment for feeding, because you're trying to get everyone dressed. They're trying to get dressed. They don't really want to be up so early. They've got to get to school. They may not really want to go to school. So there's a whole lot of emotions around feeding and around breakfast time. Whereas by the time they're at school, they're relaxed, they're in the mode, and then they would be more willing and willing, because their tummies are like, okay, now it's time to eat. So
yeah. I mean, so much of what you were saying now sounds so familiar. Just this morning at our house. We've got some more questions for you from the audience. So Georgina is saying, thank you for this talk, so necessary. Our daughter is 7 months and we have not introduced any grains yet. We only started with solids once she was 6 months. We have only introduced animal proteins, fruit and vegetables. Our pediatrician suggested us to start introducing oats, rice, pasta, etc. But we believe that maybe it's not necessary. Is there a specific time to introduce these foods? And then after eating eggs for the third and fourth time, she vomited a few hours later on both occasions. We have not tried again. What is the procedure to reintroduce eggs? Thank you.
Okay, so there's two questions there. Let me address the grain question. So I think, grains, you can get really healthy grains that are fairly low carb grains. So like quinoa and spelt are examples of that. Grains are not necessarily a no-no for all children, and I think it is important to introduce some gluten into children's diets, because their bodies are metabolically quite different to ours to a large degree, but it's the quantity that we're introducing that is important. So in the past, the kind of word on the streets and the way my profession was taught and told to then teach is very different to what I believe today, in the sense of that your grains would make up the majority of your plate and everything else would be tiny bits. So now we are saying, no, it's different. So we want the grains to be a small part, and you want to make sure that there are healthy fats present on the plate. You want to make sure that there are good proteins present. You want to make sure there are good vegetables present, and that fruits are part of a healthy diet as well. So that is important to include and bring it into your child's early diet and expose them to it. Refined grains, however, are not needed to be introduced. So I think that is very important, is that we want it to be as close to nature as possible. And so you want your grain to be as close to its natural form as possible. And it's interesting when you feed children those type of grains, which we don't have easy access to always, is they cope better with it. Their tummies are better. They don't struggle with constipation and digestive issues. A lot of kids these days are being diagnosed with autoimmune diseases and that. And I think it's got so much to do with the way we re-engineer grains and we re-engineer those. So a lot of that has kind of brought a lot of negativity into a generally healthy diet, and given grains a very bad kind of reflection on what they need to look like. And by the end of the day, you can actually wind down the grain intake, so that you might start your day with a bit of grains. You might end your day on more proteins and veggies and that sort of thing. So kids also, like I say, grains become a very lazy food and they get into a mode of needing to find their energy and their sustenance through a very quick fix. And so they don't do the hard work that looks at when you have to actually choose different foods that come in different forms. So the way this mom is raising her child nutritionally, I think is wonderful. I think bringing in grains is a good idea. She can include that into her child's diet. She can do some good oats. She can include some good spelt. She can include some good quinoa. And those are good options that she can definitely bring in. But it doesn't have to be in excess. It doesn't have to be at every single meal time, because that will also, the more sweetness children are exposed to, they lose their taste for good veggies and good fruits. And also, if you keep it seasonal, that is also very helpful, because then they don't have an excess amount of your fruits and that are not in season, and your veggies that are not in season. Then you get the good ones that are in season, and then you have a cross range of different fruits and veggies. So, and then mix up your grains when you start introducing them, so that you kind of grain rotate. So there are over 500 grains, different types of grains in the world. And you really want to rotate them so that your child is not just getting one type of grain indefinitely, day in and day out. So sorghum is also a good grain. And so you get a different variety that you can bring into the mix. Then on the egg thing, it definitely seems like her baby is reacting to eggs. And it would be if she's introduced all the other allergens like your peanut butter, your tree nut butter, and her child was fine with that, that's great. If she's introduced her a fish to her little one and her child was fine with that, awesome. So at her next ped visit, it might be worthwhile just having a check and checking if her child is allergic to eggs before she just keeps reintroducing it. If her child doesn't show any allergy to eggs, then she can introduce it potentially in a baked manner, and see if a child reacts in a baked form. And if a child doesn't react in a baked form, then she can do that for a while. So maybe do like a baked egg quiche and then do that for a while so that her child's body can get used to it, or in a baked product. And then over time, she can retry a stovetop egg again. But I would definitely mention that to her ped.
Thank you so much for that, Kath. Next question, well, I think it's more like a comment, but it's from Poppy, and she's saying, "Hi everyone. I have realized that a lot of kids in my community, they suffer from seizures starting from age 7. And when you advise the parents about the diet, it seems they don't understand you. They have questions like, how come the other kids are not affected by this? Doctors, other offer them medication and it doesn't help them at all. And the issue of the diet, it's never advised." I don't know if you want to maybe comment. And I don't know,
Yeah.
my load shedding just hit me.
So yeah, Poppy's comment is so what I see as well, and so apt. And I think there is a misconception that diet doesn't cause seizures, in the sense that, so it's like, I understand what parents are saying. They're actually saying, okay, but that child eats sugar and they don't have seizures, and my child, you're telling me I must take out sugar and then my child won't have, potentially may not have seizures anymore. And I think it's just that misunderstanding the cause and effect there. So it's that we are putting the child on a therapeutic diet. It's going to be a medical version of kind of assistance. So we wanting the child's metabolism to change from a starch burner to a fat burner, so it can produce ketones, so that the ketones can be used in the brain as a form of medication to interrupt seizure pathways. Whereas your child next door does not have a seizure condition, a seizure syndrome. So their body doesn't need the ketones to interrupt seizure pathways, but they would do very well being on a healthy diet, as we've been discussing, for other reasons. But if you are talking about seizure interruption, then you need to focus on the diet as a medical method to assist with seizure reduction. So it's not that because the child is eating sugar, they've got seizures. No, the child is having epilepsy and they've got a diagnosed epilepsy syndrome. And so therefore they are having seizures. But the diet can be a tool to actually assist.
Thank you so much. I think you really explain it in a really good way for, for other people also to understand the difference.
Mm.
Since we're already past two, I think I have one last question from my side for you. And given the digital age that we live in, I mean, even as myself as a parent, sometimes we get so overwhelmed with all the nutritional advice, and we don't know like what's the best diet, and what's the best way to feed our children. And what advice would you give to parents that are feeling like overwhelmed and they don't know where to go and how to approach the nutrition of their child?
So if we're talking to the general population, not neurotypical children who generally are just coping well and doing well, or moms who are wanting to wean initially and that, I would say definitely go for a healthy carb. If you're going to make choices in your carbs in the diet, healthy carbs, and don't make them the fundamental nutrients of your child's whole diet. Give space for all the other nutrient groups. Think fats as well, because fats are good for the brain. And we know that omega-3 is good for the brain. That only comes through your essential fats. So you want to be conscious of fats. Rotate your grains, as I mentioned. Bring in your healthy fruits and vegetables. Ensure that they are seasonal. So how do you know if they're seasonal? Well, they don't cost a fortune. So if they become, the more the fruit becomes, okay, this is affordable now, that means it's probably coming into season. Include it. Protein is healthy. Include that in your child's diet in forms that they find easy to eat. Children often don't want to eat protein because they have to chew it. So make it easier for them. Think about that. Always think about the end products and how they're going to accept it. And keep it as natural as possible. So the less ingredients on your food label, the better. So a pack of lettuce will just say lettuce. That means it's got no other funnies in it or nasties or additives into it. So try and keep that and make your goal 80% of the time. If you're eating like that 80% of the time, we know this is the real world. We live in the real world. We know that you're going to go out and just have a pizza, or you might just choose a juice, but make that only 20% of the time, but that's okay. I always say to my kids, they're all grown up now, but I always say to them, focus on eating the good stuff. Then when you have that pizza or you have that burger or something else, then your body can cope with it because your gut is healthy. You're able to have all the micronutrients. So when you get in a little bit of a trans fat or you get in a bit of sugar, then it's not the end of the world. Obviously, if your child has got ADHD, has got autism, has got epilepsy, it's a different discussion altogether because you are using diet then to heal. So let food be thy medicine, as Hippocrates says. Well, we think he said it because there's a bit of a debate around that, but I love that. Let food be thy medicine. And that can be the case for our children who are struggling. But if we also take that approach 80% of the time with our healthy children, it's going to just make them that much more healthy and able to cope with life, which is very stressful.
Thank you so much, Kath, and thank you again for joining us today. Before we end off, I just want to ask on behalf of our audience, if anyone wants to reach out to you, want to contact you, how can they find you? Where can they find you?
I think the best is on my website, which is www.nutripedes.co.za.
That's great. And thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you everyone that joined in the discussion, that engaged, that asked questions. It's always so lovely to have you here. And yeah, again, thank you so much, Kath. I hope everyone has a lovely, lovely afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.